What about Truman's decision to drop the bomb on the atomic bombs?
Yeah. Well, when I got to work for Mr. Truman, we had a number of good conversations, because another thing that happened to me was a friend of mine named Hal Boyle, another journalist, called me up and he said, "Frank, there's a book coming out by the Overseas Press Club called Men Who Make Your World. And I've been asked to write a chapter about Harry Truman. I don't even know Mr. Truman, but you know him, so I recommended you to write this chapter." So there I had to go do an interview with Mr. Truman. I asked him about the decision to make the drop on use those weapons. He said, "You know, Frank, again, I had to make the most terrible decision in history. I knew that the bloodshed would be terrible. But others in our military told me that we would have to do even worse things in order to win the war." One of the things General LeMay, who was in command of our B-29 fleet, said, "Frank, we don't want to use those atom bombs because we can wipe out Japan from one end to the other." And I said, "Well, General, what would happen?" He said, "Well, we'd have to kill a lot of people." And you know, those Japanese, Truman looked at me and he said, "Frank, they're just as human as you and I are." Because in the course of the war, they were referred to as slanty-eyed monsters. They were dehumanized. But Truman said, "No, I will never consider anybody in war or peace as anything except another human being. And I'm not going to regard the Japanese as monsters. They made mistakes, they've done wrong things, but I want to end this war as fast as possible." I was told if I used these bombs, we could end the war and have a minimum number of people killed on both sides. That's why I did it, Frank. And
what was Truman's view of war generally that inspired you?
Truman was a combat officer in World War I. He was a lieutenant in the infantry, just like my father. No, he was in the field artillery. And he hated war. He said, "Frank, we've got to figure out what to do about war, or humanity is not going to survive. This is the great issue." That's one of the last things he said to me when I left the White House. "We've got to figure out a way of getting rid of war, or war will get rid of humanity." So that made a deep impression on me. I never heard anybody talk like that. Most of the people I knew said, "Well, it's terrible, but we just had all these wars through history. We got to keep fighting wars." Not Truman. He had refused to accept the idea that wars were legitimate. He said they're destructive, we've got to get rid of them. And that made me realize that my father had come back from World War I with nightmares. He'd been in combat, hand-to-hand combat, ramming his bayonet into a German soldier being attacked. And he screamed at night. My mother said, "You've got to wake your father up. He's having another nightmare about combat." So I knew about war, not from an abstract point of view, but from having your father screaming and yelling. And my father never got over it. All his life, he had these nightmares about fighting. And that was what war was. It was one nightmare after another.
So was it Truman in combination with your father's experience that inspired you to work to found the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation?
Yeah, Truman did, and I was also inspired by the people I met in the Truman campaign. Bill Batt and all the people of the American Veterans Committee, they were all dedicated veterans of World War. They'd been out there. They'd seen what war did to people, and they wanted no part of it. They wanted to stop war. And that was considered very radical in those days. So my friends were astounded. They thought I was a, kind of a routine thinker. They didn't think I would go that far and say, we got to get rid of war. But under the influence of Truman, I decided that war was the enemy of all human beings, whether they're Japanese or Germans or black or white.